Welcome to episode 39c of the Tax Professionals podcast. This episode is to help you to pass the accounting CBE for ATT and CTA with Emma Brierley, this episode's guest.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
In this episode, Emma shares her advice and suggested study approach from her experience of recently sitting and passing the accounting CBE. This episode is part of a wider series covering all the CBEs to help you to pass them, and before listening to this, I highly recommend listening to episode 39. Episode 39 covers the key information you need to know about the CBEs and how to study for them to ensure you pass, and this episode contains supplementary advice for the accounting CBE. You can access episode 39 in your podcast player of choice or by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP39. You can also download a supplementary tip sheet for passing the CBEs by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/CBE tips. That's thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/CBE tips. All of the links mentioned just now are in the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP39c or can be found in the details section of the episode in your podcast player. TTPP39c just stands for the Tax Professionals Podcast Episode 39c. There's plenty of previous episodes on the podcast to help you be passing the ATT and CTA exams, but that's not all that's covered. There's interviews with successful tax professionals to hear the secrets to their success and episodes covering how to improve important skills for working in tax. Head on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com or search for the Tax Professionals Podcast in your podcast player of choice to listen. Just before we get into the episode, I would like to mention this. When I graduated, my first job choice was to be an actuary, with working in tax as a close second. And even though I've enjoyed all my tax roles, it wasn't until I became CTA qualified that I decided tax was where I wanted to stay. With tax, there's so many different roles and places to work. They all provide something a bit different, and while that's great, it's meant I spent a lot of time thinking about what areas of tax I want to work in and where I want to take my career long term. I've been caught up in my own thoughts. I've had doubts. I've been unsure. What's been most useful for me is talking to others, saying what I'm thinking, having someone listen, and hearing their advice. The tax recruitment company understands this and can help you with a free career coaching chat with them. They have over 60 years experience in the sector. They can help you explore the options, they can help you decide what's best for you, and they can help you to create a plan to transform your tax career, making you feel more content and happier in your life. You can book a free, no obligation call with them by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/free career chat. That's thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/free career chat. Thanks to the tax recruitment company for sponsoring the podcast, which is helping me to continue creating episodes. Without further ado, let's get to the episode. Just to start us off then today, Emma, could you tell us a little bit about your tax career and professional qualifications?
Yep, definitely. So I've got a law degree. So I started off wanting to be a solicitor. By the time I'd finished the degree, I'd decided I did not want to be a solicitor anymore. Law was not for me. So I started working in an accountancy practice. I got some experience in bookkeeping and VAT returns and things like that. And then my manager said, would you like to have a go at doing some tax returns, see if you like it? So I was like, right, yeah, okay, let's give it a go. Absolutely loved it. I thought this is definitely what I want to do. So got a bit more practice experience, moved on to the job that I'm in now. They offered to put me through the, it's the ATT CTA pathway that I'm actually doing to become a chartered tax advisor. And I've just sat the last, the corporation tax ATT exam. So fingers crossed in January, I will have passed that and achieved the first part of the qualification, and then it's on to the chartered exams. But whilst continuing to work in practice, I do personal tax, corporation tax, P11Ds, dabble in a little bit of VAT and CIS payroll. So it's quite a mixed bag really, and a varied role, and I love it. I love everything to do with tax.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you cover in your role. It's a very varied role by the sounds of it.
Yeah, it is, but I love it because you're not doing the same thing every day.
Yeah.
And it broadens your experience and your knowledge.
It does. It does, absolutely. So have you already done all of your CBEs then? No.
Yes, I sat all the CBEs. So the CBEs were the first two, the first exams that I ever did. So I sat the law and ethics and the professional responsibilities ones. Then I sat the personal tax and the BTAP. And then I was due to do the accounting exam and then the corporation tax one, and unfortunately COVID hit. So that delayed things by about 12 months. Because obviously, as you well know, everything got a bit hectic. So I sat the accounting CBE in July of this year, 1st of July, passed it, and then sat the corporation tax one in November, and that's what I'm awaiting the results of now.
Yeah, I always say to people actually that you should start with the CBEs, but no one actually usually does it. But it sounds like I found someone that actually did start with 2 CBEs.
Yeah, well, I think because I had the law degree, and there was, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of stuff within those CBEs that I hadn't really touched on before, and a lot that is relevant to the tax rule, and I think that it's really important. You know, it's a really important part of the qualification. But because I had that law background, and it wasn't, you know, a million years ago since I did the degree, it seemed to make sense to sort of get them out of the way, so to speak, because that was where my strengths were, and it took a little bit less revision to do those than it did the other exams, and everything in them is very, very relevant to practice. So it's, you know, it's a good one to get under your belt early on, I think.
It is, yeah. No, I absolutely agree. So in terms of the accounting CBE then, Emma, how did you find that one in particular?
I found the accounting CBE quite difficult, primarily because the firm that I work for, the tax and the accounts team are entirely separate. So the tax team, we do prepare the corporation tax return from start to finish. The accountants will prepare the accounts, bring them to us. So I didn't really have any experience with preparing trial balances, accruals, provisions, double entry, stock, all of the different elements, they were just to name a few. So I found it really, really difficult, and I sort of put my own building blocks up because I thought, what do I need to know all this for? You know, I'm not going to be doing trial balances as part of a tax return. I don't need to know all these things. But the more I got into it and the more I revised and I read through the material and I practiced, the more I realised how relevant it is and how much it's actually helped me doing my job, spotting things. And I've got the utmost respect for accountants because the level of knowledge that they have to have, to do their job is absolutely unbelievable. And I don't think I really understood that until I revised for this exam, and by the end of it, there were actually quite a few elements of it that I really, really did enjoy. But it was definitely a journey to get to that point.
Yeah, you don't really realise, do you, the amount of stuff that goes into the accounting things, and also, like, actually, because you said you work kind of cross personal tax and corporation tax, that's kind of comes into your role. It is useful to know those things, isn't it? Because they do impact the amount of corporation tax you pay. You need to have. The accountants need to follow the accounting standards, don't they, for corporation tax purposes? Yeah,
definitely. And there are a lot of things that are irrelevant. I mean, provisions is probably one just off the top of my head. Looking at how the tax treatment of different leases, because all things like that were covered in it, everything to do with VAT. In the up-to-date material, it covers the regulatory framework and cash flow statement, which I found incredibly interesting. And the firm I work for, we are auditors. So that also came into play. So it was really, really interesting. But yeah, the more I did it, the more I realised, yes, this is actually really relevant to the role of a tax advisor. And it's really important that, we learn this and that we do it. And yeah, a lot of it was really, really interesting. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't want to be an accountant. And there's definitely a different approach from being an accountant to a tax advisor. But I did find some of it really, really interesting. And I'm really glad that I did end up getting the chance to do it, because I think it has made me better at my job, and made it not a lot easier to do corporation tax returns.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that is good to note, because even though you might feel like it's a chore at the time, because as you say, you don't personally need to prepare accounts, you don't personally do trial balances or cash flows, it's still useful to your job and it still helps you to do it better. So it is actually useful for you as a tax professional, isn't it, to have this knowledge?
I think it really is, and I think probably not in bigger firms, but I think in some smaller firms there can often be a bit of a silo sometimes between accounts and tax people, because we don't always understand what each other's roles are and how important those roles are. And sometimes if you are in separate departments, I mean, you have a lot of tax accountants and we have tax accountants as well, you know, that are accountants and are tax qualified, but you don't always appreciate what the other role does. So it made me really appreciate that and really understand what it is that they have to do to get that set of accounts in front of me and those working papers in order for me to, you know, prepare a corporation tax return. You know, so I think it was really good from that point of view, if anything else.
Yeah, no, I agree. And because I work in employment taxes, I didn't think there was going to be anything of use really from the accounting stuff for me. And to be fair, there's not much. What's useful to know is kind of about just how people like code things to their nominal accounts and stuff, because we do like analysis for PSAs and things like that. So even for me, that doesn't really deal with accounts in any way. It is still useful for me in ways as well.
Oh yeah, definitely.
You have given kind of a bit of an overview already of some topics that are covered. I think you mentioned accruals, provisions, double entry, trial balances.
Yeah.
Was there any other things that stick out as kind of things that are covered by the accounting CBE?
Yeah, bonus share, rights issue of shares, which is there was quite a few questions on it in the actual exam, and I also obviously did the corporation tax exam, and it came up in that as well. So there was a crossover of questions that were on the CBE that also came up on the corporation tax exam. So learning the double entry was also very relevant for that. You know, so it served a little bit of a dual purpose. There was also, like I said, a lot on cash flow statements, the regulatory framework, how the accounts are set out, everything to do with FRS, disposals of fixed assets, the different tax treatment of leases, which again is very relevant for tax, but obviously the double entry, the treatment of stock. There was quite a large chapter on the treatment of stock, which is one of the ones that I really struggled with. And deferred tax, there was quite a large chapter on deferred tax, which I found incredibly helpful. I mean, the software that we use actually prepares a deferred tax computation when we do the corporation tax return, and I'd never checked it or done anything with it because I was told, oh, it's an accounting principle, so just run it off and the accountants will check it. And that sort of didn't really sit right with me because I'm nosy and I like to know what I'm doing and what I'm producing. So I found it very to be able to then apply that in practice when I'm preparing a corporation tax return and the accountants need the deferred tax, to be able to run that off, but actually look at it, read it, understand it, confirm that it's correct, or, you know, fix it if it isn't.
Yeah, no, exactly. It actually sounds like they've added a lot of extra topics, because when I did ATT, the accounting was part of one of the written papers. And I think it's only fairly recently that they split it out, but it sounds like they've done that because they've added a lot more topics. I can't remember doing anything to do with rights of issue of shares. I can't remember doing quite a lot of the things actually that you just mentioned.
Well, it did change because the original edition of the accounting book that I got, because I didn't sit it due to COVID, they actually then updated it. But when I originally sat the business tax exam, I'd just missed the marker for not having to do the accounting one. I'd just left it a little bit too long between doing the exams, and even the change in edition from then to now, they've added the cash flow statements, the regulatory framework. There was a lot more on stock, and there was a much larger chapter on deferred tax. It was really minimal when I'd originally looked at it in my old book. So yeah, they have added a lot more into it, and like I said, some of it was actually relevant when I was sitting the corporation tax exam as well.
Yeah. So it definitely does sound more difficult now. So kind of, how did you personally go about studying for this? I mean, did you use a study provider, or did you do everything from just the manual that you buy from the ATT?
I am with Kaplan, but I do the distance learning. So Kaplan is there for support, but I did have obviously the book, the ATT book, which, to be honest, pretty much gives you everything that you need. The ATT actually also put 2 mock exams on their ATT website. Now, when I originally started revising for this exam, one of the gripes that I had, and I actually contacted the ATT about it, the institute, was that it didn't give you the answers. So you would revise and then go on to do your mock exams, because I think that is the absolute best way to revise, is to do practice papers and practice exams. And you just got a mark at the end, and it'd tell you which answers you got wrong, but you didn't get the right answer. So after obviously struggling with a few topics and consistently not getting the right answer, I contacted the institute and sort of said, can you provide us with the answers? And the response I got back was, no, you need to refer back to your study manual and basically learn it. So I was like, right, okay. So I was still struggling with some of these questions. Luckily, I work with a fantastic team of chartered accountants, so I went back to them and said, please, can you help me with this? And finally got there. Had a little bit of a break because of COVID, came back. And when I came back, the actual format of the mock exams had changed and they actually provided the answers. So that made a massive difference, because I could actually see where I was going wrong, what the answer was. And sometimes, especially when it's something that you don't do all the time, you need to see the answer and you have to work it back to work out where you're going wrong. So that was very, very helpful to be able to do that, because I got to the point where I'd read through the manual quite a few times. There's lots of questions as you're going through each chapter. Then there's end of chapter quizzes. So once you've done that a few times and you think, right, I think I've got my head around this, you need to start doing the mock test then, until you're consistently passing and you've got that understanding of it. So yeah, I just pretty much just sat and churned out doing the mock test, and then if there was something that I was consistently getting wrong, I went back to the chapter, reread over it, redid all the quizzes and the questions that are in it. And I think it really is a case of practice makes perfect. And if you're struggling with something, and there were topics that I was struggling with, go and talk to your colleagues, go and talk to the people that have already done this. That can, sometimes it's easier to physically sit down with somebody, have a working example in front of you, and somebody can explain it to you, and you pick it up a lot quicker, because that's what you associate it with. Then when you're faced with it in the exam, you can think, oh, I can remember this scenario, or such a body showed me this on this client, and and it helps.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, actually, because I think a lot of people probably wouldn't do that. They probably wouldn't go and ask colleagues, but as you say, they've probably done the exams not long before you. And even if they haven't, they're probably going to know the answer if they've been doing the job for like a long time. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I certainly, accosted some of my directors to sit down with me and go through some of these queries, and they were very, very happy to help. And some of it was a bit of an eye-opener for them, because we came across a few questions. I remember there being one on debtor days, and me showing it to my director, who's been in practice for about 30-40 years, and he's a chartered auditor, and he gave me what he thought the answer was, and I said, that's not right. So I showed it, and he was like, oh, right. And then he was like, right, let me go away and look at this. And anyway, he got to it and he said, oh, this is the way they're doing it now. And I've read up on it. And so it was quite a sort of interesting learning curve, I think, for everybody on some of them. And there were a few trick ones where I'd send them and I'd say, I really don't understand how they get into this answer. And they'd come back and go, yeah, they're trying to be a bit tricky with you. This is the need to take it. You put on your accounting head and not your tax head.
Yeah, which is different, isn't it? Because the way that accounting works and the way that tax works are completely different. I think accounting, actually, generally speaking, is more logical, but there's certainly areas which still aren't. And most of tax is not logical, at least not for employment taxes anyway.
No.
No. Not, is it?
No, I totally agree.
I bet at the end of this anyway, your directors were like, God, I'm absolutely sick of them asking all these questions.
yeah, they were like, oh, we're so glad you've passed that and we can move on to something else. So I just moved on to corporation tax questions then as well in preparation for the next exam.
Sounds like even they had a nice refresh of some things that they don't really use that often in practice as well. So it sounds like good both ways.
Yeah, Well, it is, yeah, because, a lot of directors will review things. They won't, quite rightly don't sit and do double entry, but sometimes, like with anything, it's good to get back to the nitty gritty, and everything changes so much, not just in tax, but, and in finance and accounts across the board. And I think it helps everybody to stay relevant and keep up to date with changes. That's the good things about doing these exams and revising. The people that are doing it right now, we're probably dealing with the most up-to-date and relevant things, and we're more aware of it often than others, especially if you're busy, you've not had time to go and do that webinar or that update. So, it swings and roundabouts. You can all help each other out.
You can, absolutely. I mean, are there any kind of areas of the syllabus that you think are kind of more important than others to absolutely master? Obviously, you need to know the whole syllabus, but are some chapters, I suppose, giving you more marks than others overall? Do they give more questions on some chapters?
You need to be able to master T accounts. You need to be able to, understand double entry, put it into T accounts and close them off, ready for moving them into a trial balance. A lot of the questions focused around T accounts. There weren't any of that when in the corporation tax exam, so it wasn't relevant for that, but there were a lot of T account questions and, close it off, what's the balance, that sort of thing on the actual, the exam that I did. And my colleague is at the same stage, she the same thing. There was a lot of T account questions. So I think just mastering those absolute basics, everything else sort of falls in line after that. And there were also a few questions on the cash flow statements as well, which is actually one of the newer chapters that's in the latest edition that wasn't in the original. There were quite a few questions on there in the actual exam, but I think that's a really, really good topic to be aware of in practice anyway, especially if you do work for auditors.
Yeah, I think you used a key word then anyway. You kind of said it's all the basics. And yes. I suppose they are really, because you need to know the basics, don't you, to know the stuff that's more complicated. So,
oh yeah, definitely. I mean, a big thing for me, I think the basics with the double entry, the one that I sort of connect it to straight away is reviewing directors' loan accounts, which is obviously relevant to pretty much every area of tax, benefits in kind, corporation tax, personal tax. You need to be able to look at a director's loan account and understand what is going on and what tax treatment is required, if any, and how to advise on that. And I really, really struggled with that when I very first started, because debit and credit, if you're not an accountant and you've never had any experience with double entry and bookkeeping, how you understand a debit and a credit is the opposite way around to how it actually is. Yeah. And I really, really struggled with that, even though it was so straightforward. I just couldn't understand it. But my colleague that's doing tax now, that's at the same level as me, she is actually a really, really good chartered accountant. And she sort of explained it to me in a way that I then understood from an accounting point of view, and it just sort of clicked after that. She said, get your bank statement, look at it as if you were a bank. This is how you need to think. This is how you need to approach it. And in the most up-to-date CBE, it actually uses that method as of how you need to think about it. Think about it as if you're looking at your bank statement. And I think, like I said, once you've made that, then something like a director's loan account and looking at what you need to do to it, all then falls into place. So that makes it really, really relevant to tax, even though you think, well, that's just the basics. It's just double entry. It's just understanding what a debit is and what a credit is and what effect those things are, what falls into those two categories. And I think once you've actually mastered that, everything else will fall into line. But I won't lie, it took me a long time to get my head around it, and it was just practice.
Yeah, I think once you get the principle for T accounts, as you say, it makes sense. What I always used to do was go back to cash. And I always knew that the more cash you had, the higher the debit was. And then obviously when it comes to double entry, then just have to think, okay, well, now what's the other side to that equation, or what do I need to do so that there's something equivalent on the credit side? So yeah, I think if you can do something like that, then it will make it easier to almost understand what's happening, because that's the principle of a T account, isn't it? Whatever happens on the debit needs to happen on the credit as well. Just a reminder that you can book a free career coaching chat with the Tax Recruitment Company by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/free career chat. The tax recruitment company can help you decide what's best for you and your career. So kind of knowing what you know there, then after sitting it and passing it, what would be your suggested approach for studying for the accounting CBE?
It would be to get the ATT manual, go through it, do all the end of chapter questions that are in there and do them over and over again until you know you understand it. Because a lot of those end of chapter questions, very similar to the law and ethics and the professional responsibilities exams, the questions that are in there are almost identical to the ones that are on the actual exam that you sit. They'll change the wording or the scenario slightly, but if you do those questions, you've mastered it because you're exposing yourself to all the different type of possible scenarios and questions that they could ask you in the exam. But you need to understand it, and you will only get that through practice. And like I said, and asking questions. If you don't understand, I was very much at the beginning, I don't want to ask anybody anything. I'm going to look really silly. I should know this. I should understand it. And I just didn't. And in the end, I thought, no, I just need to ask somebody for help to sit down and physically, explain it to me. And once that was done, it sort of all fell into place after that. So yeah, if you are struggling with it, ask your colleagues, ask whether it's in the office or via Zoom or whatever. Sometimes just talking things out, which is very much the same with tax, you reach the answer to your question anyway, and your understanding of it. So yeah, practice, ask your colleagues if you're struggling with something, or ask somebody that's previously done it. Just perseverance.
like you need with all the ATT and CTA
well
exams.
Yeah, but for any exam, whatever you're doing, perseverance, motivation, and just eventually you will get there.
Yeah. Good. I think you alluded to earlier on in the episode as well that you did all the mock exams and stuff that you got given. I mean, did you wait until you'd learned the chapters first and felt like you understood them, or did you start approaching some of the questions in the mock exams before then?
No, I probably went through the book twice before I actually started the mock exam, only for my own. I didn't want to go and do the mock exam, fail it really badly, and it sort of knocked my confidence a little bit because I was already feeling a little bit unsure about things because I didn't have a lot of obviously exposure to accounts, and I thought I don't want to start doing this mock exam, and it sort of set me back a bit. So because we had that bit of extra time to revise because of COVID, yeah, I did go through the book at a bit more of a leisurely pace, and went through it twice, and then I focused on doing these mock exams. And after I'd done them a couple of times, I sort of noticed what areas I was struggling with and I wasn't really picking up, and consistently I was getting the wrong answer. And I then went back and revised that chapter again, and then once I'd revised it again, I'd go back and do the mock exam. And because you've got to have the understanding, I think originally I sort of thought, if I could just memorize these different types, the double entry of the disposal of a fixed asset, it'll be fine. But it's not. You need to have that understanding of it. So yeah, I think personally, it's better to have a pretty good understanding and get, make your way through that book first, and then once you feel like, yeah, I think I've got this, start doing the mock exams, and then you can home in on, if anything, the areas you're struggling with.
Yeah, I think the key word there is understanding. Memorization doesn't work, yes. I don't think, does it, when it comes to ATT and CTA exams? You do need to make sure you understand it, so focus on that. It's interesting, actually, that you said you went through the manual twice, because if I was speaking to someone usually, I'd tell people that that's a really bad use of time if you're just kind of rereading stuff. But where you're saying you needed the confidence boost, I think in those cases it makes sense to do it, because if you don't have confidence and then you go and say to the mock exam and you just fail it miserably, then as you say, you're going to be so demotivated and lacking confidence at that point, you're probably going to find it hard to then do the rest of the studying. So actually, to be fair, in your case, and for anyone else who's lacking confidence with it as well, going through the manual for a second time could be a good idea. It obviously worked because you passed first time, didn't you?
Well, yeah, I did. As well, it did help a little bit with COVID, because you had that little bit of extra time because everything was sort of delayed and pushed back, and exams dates were moved and cancelled, and I didn't want to do the CBE remotely. I wanted to actually go and sit down, because the examination site for where I live is not that far away. So I sort of knew I didn't want to sit and do it remotely anyway. So I thought I might as well use this time while I've got it to gain a really, really good understanding of it. And yeah, I just knew that if I sat it after reading through it once and I failed it miserably, it was going to really sort of set me back. So in this particular, scenario, yeah, it worked out better for me to hit that way.
Yeah. So one thing that's crossed my mind actually is because when, as I said kind of earlier on in the episode, when I did this, it was the accounting was part of one of the written papers. I think it was the business tax one. Like, how on earth do you do a T account in this online software and, like financial statements and stuff?
Yeah, well, it didn't the personal tax paper I did written at an exam site, but the business tax and the corporation tax I've done using the Exam4 software. So the corporation tax exam that I've just done, they did update the software slightly so that you could add sort of tables and lines in, but you couldn't do like a lengthways one. So it being, I think they would actually ask you to prepare a set of T accounts on that Exam4 software. And when I did the CBE, a lot of them were multiple choice, but if there was a T account question, it was already set, the box was set out, and you just had to drag whatever, it'd give you like a set of different accounts that you could drag over, and you could just drag over which one you thought. So the actual T account was already set out there.
Yeah. Okay.
So that made it a bit easier.
Well, yeah, of course, it's multiple choice, isn't it? These ones.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay. Good. I mean, you've already given quite a lot of good tips already in this discussion. Have you got kind of any final pieces of advice that you want to give anyone that's looking to pass the accounting CBE?
Not really. Like I said, just to persevere, and just to sort of think, you know what, this is really, really relevant to your role as a tax advisor. It's really important. It is, it will help you be better at your job and have a better understanding of tax and accounts. It's all beneficial. And like I said, I think that was my biggest downfall, that for a long time I sort of thought, I don't want to be an accountant. I've never wanted to be an accountant, although I have the utmost respect for them. It's not the role that I want to do. Why do I need to know all this? And it wasn't until I sort of took that chip off my shoulder and I sort of accepted it, that I started to actually enjoy it and realise how relevant it was. And I talked to other people that I work with, because we have trainee tax people, we have trainee accountants, trainee auditors, everything. And after you talk to people, you find that they found it difficult as well. So you're not the only one. So I think if you feel like you're struggling or you're not sort of getting something, then talk to somebody. Talk to somebody on LinkedIn. Make connections on LinkedIn, like-minded people, tax professionals, trainee tax professionals, lecturers. If you don't want to speak to your colleagues, if you're happy speaking to your colleagues, speak to people that have done it before. Sometimes just having a chat with somebody can make you think, you know what, I can actually do this. And, I'm not the only person that's found this difficult. It doesn't mean I'm not going to be really good at my job in a few years' time when I've passed all this, or it doesn't mean I'm not good at my job now. It's just this particular area that I'm struggling with, or I haven't picked up straight away. So yeah, I think that'd be it. I didn't really want to ask people at first, because I thought, people are going to think I'm silly, or that I don't understand and I'm never going to be able to do it. And then once I got over that, I seemed to pick things up a lot quicker once I started chatting to people about it.
I hope you found the tips and advice given in this episode useful. You can download the supplementary tip sheet for passing the CBEs by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/CBE tips. If you haven't already, go take a listen to episode 39, which is all about how to pass the CBEs with study tips and advice. There's plenty of previous episodes on the podcast to help you with passing the ATT and CTA exams, but that's not all that's covered. There's interviews with successful tax professionals to hear the secrets to their success, and episodes covering how to improve an important skills for working in tax. Head on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com or search for the Tax Professionals Podcast in your podcast player of choice to listen. All of the links and episodes mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP39c, and also they can be found in the details section of the episode in your podcast player of choice. But that's it for this episode. I hope you liked the episode and have taken away some useful points to help you to progress, develop and improve your tax career. Until next time.